I wrote a letter to Sheeds from Pev. Pev didn't know it, Sheeds didn't know it. Now I called Pev in and I said, Pev, I've written Sheeds a letter from you expressing why you should be on the Essendon list.
Hi everyone, my name's Julian Trantino and I'm from the Dons digital team. While we wait for footy to return, we're pleased to bring you a 5-part series with Adrian Dodoro, the club's GM of Liston Recruiting. Leading the club's recruiting for 22 years, Adrian has a wealth of draft stories that he'll be sharing exclusively on the podcast. We hope you enjoy it. Well, Adrian, the name Damien Peverill, it's a name that's dear to the Essendon faithful, but for you in particular, recruited at pick 32 in the 2001 rookie draft, went on to play 144 games in 8 seasons for the Bombers. Damien had a fascinating journey to Essendon. Can you talk us through it?
Yeah, I can, and it's one of my favourite stories and one of my favourite people of all time at Essendon Footy Club. So Damien, obviously another Calder Cannon product, came through Keilor Park, and just kept getting knocked back year after year. And I remember watching him play as a supplementary player at Melbourne back in those days, and great work ethic. Could just run and run and run. But he had this mechanical kicking style which turned a lot of people off. But if you really studied it, it was actually quite effective. It just didn't look all that great. And he came and did a number of pre-seasons with us, and he would win every single running session that we had. He was sublimely fit. The problem with Pev was back then was he didn't talk too much. Very, very introverted bloke, hardly said a word, really likeable, lovable sort of guy, but just couldn't express himself, had no extroverted nature whatsoever. And I always had this philosophy with recruiting players that if you're going to recruit a player because you think he can add value to your team, then you certainly pick him. But if your coaching staff who see a guy in pre-seasons actually think that he's not the right fit for you, then there's probably no reason to draft a guy to your club if he's not going to get played. But I was really strong on Pev, and I just couldn't get Sheeds over the line with him.
You just mentioned there trying to get Sheeds over the line. There's that famous story about a letter that you and Pev had to draft to Sheeds to try and get his faith. Can you talk me through that?
Yeah, it's a great story. Pev and I would, obviously talk quite a bit, and I just couldn't get Sheeds over the line to believe in Pev. So I came up with this idea. I said, right. So I wrote a letter to Sheeds from Pev. Pev didn't know it, Sheeds didn't know it. Now I called Pev in and I said, Pev, I've written Sheeds a letter from you expressing why you should be on the Essendon list. Anyway, he looked at it because Pev had this problem at the time. He couldn't really express himself. He was so shy. Anyway, so he wrote the letter word for word, copied what I had written, gave it to Sheeds. Sheeds the next day came like, oh, you're not going to believe the letter that Damien Peverill wrote me. Oh, we've got to take this, boy. So that was, so yeah, you're right, Sheeds, great kid. Yep, no dramas. And the rest is history. We ended up drafting him. And in that year, if you remember correctly, you could come off the rookie list, play, but when an injured player came off the injured list, then the rookie couldn't play anymore. And I, to this day, say that he played a major part in us losing that 2001 grand final because he was in brilliant form. He was exactly what we needed at the time. He could have played on a Sean Hart or a Michael Voss. But if you remember, there's a famous picture of him being walked off the ground. I think it might have been in Sydney, where the players are giving him a standing ovation, knowing that he had to go off the senior list and go back into the VFL program that year, and we couldn't play him in the finals that year. And obviously, as a consequence, the AFL did change the rules with rookies, so they can come on the list and stay on the list. And I always thought that year that, particularly going to that 2001 grand final, we had so many players that were injured and underdone that he would have been absolutely vital to us. And I'm not saying we would have won the game, but I'm confident that he certainly would have made a difference for us.
It's a bit of a shame we couldn't see him out there in the 2001 grand final. But just on that letter, what exactly did it say? Do you remember what you wrote in it?
I've actually got it. I've actually still got a copy of it somewhere, but it was mainly along the lines of just being really appreciative, giving the opportunity, and I put myself in his shoes and just, what would Sheeds have wanted to hear? And Sheeds is one of these guys that he wanted people that were committed, hungry, willing to do the work, and had a bit of mongrel in them. And that was the essence of the letter. And I mean, maybe Pev tweaked it a little bit, but it certainly worked for him.
There's also the factor of growing up barracking for the club that you drafted for. So we know that Pev was a big Essendon supporter growing up. Do you give that much consideration when you're looking at potential draftees?
I think it's important. We had a number of boys. Dyson Heppel was a just mad Essendon supporter. David Zaharakis grew up barracking for the Bombers. It does mean a lot. Even this year we took, Harry Jones, and the night before the draft he gave me a call and just said, please draft me tomorrow. It's been my lifelong dream. And it's not the factor to draft a young man, but it does mean a hell of a lot to know that you've got a young boy that wants to be at your football club, because going forward, when you've got to recontract these guys and there's other clubs coming looking for them, that there is a loyalty factor, and it is important. It does play a vital part in building your club and creating that environment that you want, that special environment that you want around the place.
And we saw Pev just absolutely get the best out of himself, and he really put everything into the red and black. What do you think were the reasons you could put that down to?
Oh, there's no doubt he was the junkyard dog. He had been rejected that many times that he had to make every post a winner, and his training ethic, work ethic was phenomenal. He would, the old grinder at the club, I think he wore it out. Every time he had an injury, he would still be the fittest guy coming back from an injury. Resilience, tough. I remember one day he got kicked in the arm, broke his arm, got operated that night and played the following week. He was just a genuinely tough player and extremely underrated. Like, he got the big jobs every week and he carried them out. He did it. And he became a really reliable person for the club, and again, highly, highly respected.
I know every recruiter would probably say yes to this, but the way he just burst onto the scene as a replacement for Joe Mercedes when he was injured, would you have imagined in your wildest dreams he would have come along that quickly after pretty much going 4 years undrafted and having all these unsuccessful stints everywhere?
Yeah. Well, the thing was, he was performing at a really high level at VFL level, but a lot of people thought that form wouldn't have translated at the highest level. But good form is good form. And he was at a really nice age, probably 21, 22 years of age. So physically he was mature, he was hungry, and he might have been introverted in nature, but as a footballer, expressing himself, he was extroverted, hungry, desire. And, they're the great stories in footy, guys that want to make something of their lives. And he certainly was one of those guys that said, not by words, but by actions, that's what he wanted to achieve. And he certainly got the best out of himself.
And we do see him around the club a fair bit now, obviously with his son Noah and his daughters Scarlett and Mia in the James Hird Academy. Is it fair to say that you're both still very good friends?
I love Pev. I was fortunate enough to be at his wedding. Probably haven't seen him as much in recent days as possible. But every time he comes to the James Hird Academy, there's always that affection between the two of us, something pretty special. And he's a guy that hopefully his young fella and his girls turn out to have the same grit that their father had.
Adrian, we often see, with a change of coach, players can fall out of favour, and unfortunately it didn't end too well for Pev when he was delisted in 2008. How hard a period was that for Damien, and do you feel like maybe he was a little bit harshly dealt by?
Yeah, I think so. I always felt that Damien had a bit more left in the tank. But then again, Pev would have been one of these guys that would have played until he's 100, because that's just how he was wired. He was just a competitor and just a super fit player. But, once Sheeds got sacked in 2007 and then Matthew Knights came on as coach. Knight, I just wanted to take the team on a different path, on a different trajectory. He had a different vision for the team. I remember there was one day, I think it was Anzac Day 2008, when he was an emergency before the game, and I remember thinking to myself, shit, he'd be terrific if he could put him out in the park today. But he never played that day, and I just thought, well, maybe this is a sign that we're taking this team in a different direction. And this happens a lot with a lot of players. But one thing about Pev, he never whinged, never complained, never dropped any of his standards around the football club, because that's the sort of character and person that he was. But the club decided to go in a different direction, and he, like a lot of other players at that time, left the club.
Well, with all that considered, when you look back on the selection of Damien Peverill, is it one that where does it rank, I guess, in your list from your 22 years in recruiting at the club?
Really, really highly up there, because the ones that you really take a lot of pride with are the ones that don't come through traditional recruiting ranks. He's the one that you back your judgment, you back your instincts, you back your visualisation techniques. They're not the kids that are the blue bloods that come through the national draft, your first rounders, that go to draft camps that do 15 beeps. They're the ones that you watch play, and they're the ones that you believe in. And I think every recruit around every club has those stories, and therefore they're the ones that you have a fair amount of affection with. And they're the great stories.
Well, thanks again for the chat, Adrian. Some great insights there into Pev. Thanks for your time.
Yep, no problem. Thanks, guys.